The kettle had already gone cold by the time I noticed it. I was sitting at the kitchen table in my house coat, the one with the fraying cuff my daughter keeps telling me to throw out, and I had a cup of tea I hadn't touched, and a notepad in front of me with a list I'd been working on for 3 weeks. Cabin sizes, meal packages, excursion options, the names of everyone I loved written across the top in my own handwriting, the way I used to write grocery lists when the kids were small, careful, deliberate, like the writing itself was an act of love. Outside, the birch trees along the back fence were just starting to go gold. It was September in Ontario, and the light had that particular quality it gets in the fall, honey-colored and a little sad, the kind that makes you feel like time is passing whether you want it to or not. I am 67 years old. I was a registered nurse for 34 years. I raised 2 children mostly on my own after my husband passed, and I did it without complaint, without asking for anything from anyone. I am not a woman who falls apart easily. But that morning, sitting at that table, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. I felt foolish. Let me go back to the beginning, because it didn't start that morning. It started the previous January, when my son called to tell me he and his wife were expecting their second child, and I said, without even thinking, we should do something special this summer. All of us, together. And he said, yeah, Mom, that'd be great. And I took that as a yes. I always took things like that as a yes. My son is 38. He married his wife 7 years ago in a small ceremony in Muskoka that I helped pay for. Gladly, because that's what you do. She's a perfectly fine woman. I say that carefully. She is organized and sharp, and she loves my son, I believe that. But she has never warmed to me in the way I hoped she might, and I stopped trying to name why about 4 years ago because the naming of it only made me lonely in a different way. They have a daughter who is 4, and she is the light of my life. When I hold that child's hand in a parking lot, when she calls me Grandma Bev in that little voice of hers, I feel like every hard thing I ever did was worth it. That is not an exaggeration. That is just the truth. So in January, I said we should do something together, and by February, I had already started looking. I wanted to plan a trip for the whole family, a proper one, not a long weekend at a rented cottage, but something they would remember. I thought about the Rocky Mountains. I thought about Prince Edward Island, which my late husband always said was the most beautiful place in Canada and where we had honeymooned 40 years ago. I thought about a cruise out of Vancouver. I settled on a river cruise, 7 nights from Vancouver to Alaska, stopping in places like Ketchikan and Juneau, with shore excursions included, a balcony cabin for me, a family cabin for my son and his wife and granddaughter, and a separate cabin for my daughter, who is 34 and single and had never been to the Pacific coast. I called the travel agency on a Tuesday afternoon and I put down a deposit of $4,800 on my visa. I told no one the amount. That is my way. I never wanted anyone to feel like a debt. Over the following weeks, I made a group chat. I sent links. I researched child-friendly shore tours and allergies and whether you could bring a car seat on a tender boat. I called the cruise line 3 times about dietary restrictions. I built a spreadsheet, not because I was trying to control anything, but because I have spent my whole adult life making sure other people are taken care of. And old habits do not simply stop because you are retired. My daughter was enthusiastic from the start. She sent me voice messages about which excursion she wanted to do and asked me to find out if there was whale watching. My son responded with thumbs up emojis, which I told myself was the same as enthusiasm. His wife didn't respond in the group chat at all, but I told myself she was busy. She was 4 months pregnant. I told myself a lot of things that winter. By April, the full balance was due. I paid it. $12,340 in total, visa and line of credit for 4 passengers and 3 cabins. I did not hesitate. I'd been saving for something like this for years. Not in any organized investment account, just in the way women like me save, quietly and without fanfare, putting money aside when we can, telling ourselves that one day we will spend it on something that matters. This felt like something that mattered. A trip with my children. One last summer before the new baby came and everything shifted again. I told my sister what I'd done, and she said, "Beverly, that's incredibly generous." And I said, "It's not generous. It's just what I wanted to do." And I meant it. May came and went. I bought new luggage, a small hard-shell carry-on and a dusty green I thought might look nice in photos. I bought a waterproof jacket and hiking sandals and a wide-brimmed hat for the deck. I didn't tell anyone about any of these purchases. I just got ready the way I have always gotten ready for things, alone and without fuss. The first week of June, my daughter called to talk about packing. We were on the phone for almost an hour, laughing about whether I needed to bring formal wear and whether my granddaughter would sleep through the boat's movement. It was one of the nicest conversations we'd had in a while, my daughter and I, and when I hung up, I sat in the garden for a bit and felt something uncomplicated, something that was close to joy. 3 days later, my son called. He didn't start with hello or how are you. He started with, "Mom, I need to talk to you about the trip." And something in my chest went quiet, the way a room goes quiet when someone turns off all the sound. He said his wife didn't feel comfortable going. He said the pregnancy had been harder than expected, which was true, I knew that. But then he kept talking and I realized the pregnancy wasn't really the point. He said she'd been thinking about it and she felt like the trip was a lot, that she found big family gatherings stressful, that she had talked to her own mother about it, and her mother had suggested maybe it would be better if it was just the immediate family, meaning her family, meaning my son and my granddaughter and her. He said, "It's nothing personal, Mom. She just needs it to be smaller." I said, "Smaller?" He said, "Yeah." I said, "I booked 3 cabins." He said, "I know." I said, "I paid for everything." He said, "I know, and we really appreciate that. We were thinking, is there any way you could transfer the deposit from your cabin to help cover some of the costs for us to go on our own?" I put the phone down on the kitchen counter, not to hang up, just to look at it for a moment, the way you look at something you are not sure you are seeing correctly. Then I picked it back up. I said, "Let me call you back." He said, "Okay." He did not sound sorry. He sounded like a man who had been coached through a difficult conversation and was relieved to be almost on the other side of it. I did not call him back that day. I sat in my kitchen and I looked at my notepad with everyone's names on it. My granddaughter's name was at the top with a little star drawn beside it because she was the reason for all of it. She was always the reason for all of it. And I thought about what it means to be 67 and healthy and still standing, and to have planned something beautiful and to have been quietly, efficiently removed from it. I thought about my husband, who had been dead for 11 years and who would have known exactly what to say, both to me and to our son. I thought about 34 years of night shifts and weekend call and missed school concerts, also that my children would have everything they needed. I thought about the $4,800 deposit I had put down in February on a Tuesday afternoon while my son was texting me thumbs up emojis. I am not a woman who falls apart easily, but I am also not a woman without limits. I went to the travel agency website that night. I logged in with the email I had used for the booking, and I reviewed all 3 reservations. My name was on the primary account. All 3 cabins, all 3 passengers, all payment methods, everything ran through me. I had set it up that way because I was the one paying, and I am organized and I do things properly. I sat with that knowledge for a while. Then I called my daughter. She answered on the second ring. I told her what had happened, and I did not cry, but I could hear her breathing change on the other end of the line, that sharp little intake of breath she's had since she was a teenager. When something upsets her, she said several things I won't repeat because this is my story and not about her reaction, but the last thing she said was, "What are you going to do?" And I said, "I'm going to think about it." What I did not say was that I had already decided. I am a retired nurse. I've spent my entire career thinking clearly in circumstances that would cause other people to unravel. I know how to make a decision under pressure. I know how to do it without flinching. Over the following 2 days, I called the travel agency. I explained that there had been a change in our party and I needed to understand my options. The agent was very kind. She had a voice like warm toast, and she walked me through everything. I could cancel with a partial refund at this stage, or I could transfer the cabin names to new passengers for a small rebooking fee. The cruise was still 2 months away. There was time. I made some calls. My friend Sheila has been my closest friend for 22 years. We worked the same ward together at Toronto Western for almost a decade. She is 64, recently widowed, and she had been talking for 2 years about wanting to go somewhere big before she turned 65. I called her first. Then I called my friend June, not a family member, a colleague from my last years of practice, the kind of woman who brings homemade butter tarts to hospital staff meetings and sends you birthday cards without fail. She is 66, semi-retired, and her children live across the country. I told them both the same thing. I have a cruise booked for August, Alaska, all inclusive. I need someone to fill 2 cabins. I would like it to be you. Sheila said, "Beverly, are you serious?" It was not a question. I said, "I am always serious." June said, "What do I need to bring?" I changed the passenger names on the 2 cabins. I moved the booking for my son's family cabin into a single supplement for Sheila, and the cabin I had originally booked for my daughter stayed exactly as it was. My daughter was still coming, and she already knew, and she had already said, "Mom, I am so glad you're doing this." The rebooking fees came to $240. I paid them without a second thought. That weekend, my son called again. He said his wife had been doing some research and she actually thought the cruise could work if it was just the 3 of them. He said they would be willing to go if I was okay with covering the cabin cost. He said, "I figured since you already have it booked, it wouldn't be a big deal." I let him finish. Then I said, "The cabin has been reassigned." He said, "What?" I said, "I made some changes to the booking. Your family's cabin has been transferred to another passenger. There's no longer a reservation under your name." There was a silence that lasted long enough to be uncomfortable. He said, "Mom, you already paid for it." I said, "I did, and the booking is in my name." He said, "Tanya is going to be really upset." I noticed that he did not say he was going to be really upset. He said, "Tanya." I noticed that and I filed it away the way I have filed many things over many years. I said, "I hope she feels better soon." The pregnancy sounds very hard. And I said goodbye. I want to be honest about what happened inside me after that call. I did not feel triumphant. I did not feel the way people in movies feel when they make the righteous choice, that swelling music feeling, that clean clarity. I felt something quieter and stranger. I felt like I had taken something back that I hadn't known I'd given away. My children. I raised them to be independent. I raised them to stand on their own. I told myself the week after that phone call that my son is a good man who loves his wife and is trying to keep the peace in his household, and that is not the worst thing a man can be. I told myself that his wife is complicated in the way that all people are complicated, and that I do not have full information about her reasons. I told myself both of these things, and I still did not change the booking back, because grace and boundaries are not opposites. You can understand someone and still decline to be erased by them. The morning of our departure, Sheila arrived at my door at 4 a.m. with a suitcase and a thermos of coffee and a look on her face that I have not seen in years, giddy and wide-eyed, like a woman who has remembered that she is also a person. We drove to Pearson together, my daughter meeting us at the terminal. We checked in and went through security and sat at the gate eating overpriced airport muffins, and Sheila said, "Tell me this is real." And I said, "It's real." The flight to Vancouver is 5 hours from Toronto. My daughter fell asleep on my shoulder somewhere over the prairies. I looked out the window at the flat brown land below, and I thought about my husband and the honeymoon in Prince Edward Island. Red sand and cold water and the way he laughed with his whole body. I thought about how he would have loved this. I thought about how many things I have done in his absence that I never expected to do alone, and how alone and lonely are not the same word, even if they rhyme. We boarded the ship on a Sunday afternoon. The mountains behind Vancouver were capped with cloud and the water was gray-green, and the ship was larger than anything I had imagined. A porter took our bags and called us ladies, and Sheila grabbed my arm and said, "Beverly, we are on a ship." The first night we had dinner at a table for four overlooking the water. June had joined us by then, slightly breathless from her flight from Halifax, still wearing her compression socks. And we sat there with our menus and our ice water and nobody's leftover feelings about whose house to go to for Christmas, and nobody's passive comments about what I was eating, and nobody's careful, considered silence when I spoke about their father, and I felt full. Not happy exactly, something more durable than happy. Something that had to do with having survived a long time and still being capable of sitting somewhere beautiful with people who chose to be there. On the third day we were in Juneau. We had booked a whale-watching excursion, Sheila's idea, enthusiastically seconded by my daughter, and we stood at the bow of a smaller vessel in the rain, all of us in our borrowed ponchos, and a humpback whale surfaced maybe 30 meters away and then rolled and dove, its tail lifting out of the water like a slow, dark door closing. Nobody said anything for a moment. Then June said very quietly, "Oh my God," and that was enough. I have thought a lot, in the months since that trip, about what it means to give. I gave for a long time to my patients, to my children, to my husband's memory, to anyone who seemed to need something I had, and I don't regret any of it. I want to be clear about that. I don't regret it because I gave from a real place, not from fear or obligation, but from love. And love doesn't sour just because someone fails to receive it properly. But there is a version of giving that is not love. There is a version that is just the habit of making yourself small so that other people can be comfortable. And I sat with that version for a long time at that kitchen table, with the cold kettle and the notepad with everyone's names on it, and on the ship, standing at the bow in the rain, watching a whale disappear into gray water, I let it go. My son and I have spoken since. He called in September, a few weeks after I returned, to tell me the new baby had arrived, a boy, healthy, 7 pounds, 4 ounces. I said I was glad, and I meant it. I asked if I could come and visit when they were settled. He said yes. Whether that yes means what I hope it means, I genuinely don't know. My granddaughter called me on a Saturday morning last month on her mother's phone. She said, "Grandma Bev, did you see a whale?" I said I did. She said, "Was it big?" I said it was the biggest thing I've ever seen. She was quiet for a moment, thinking about that, and then she said, "I want to see a whale." I said, "Then we'll go see one." I meant that too. There are things I know now that I did not fully know before this year. I know that love is not the same as availability. I know that paying for something does not make you welcome, and not paying for something does not make you unwanted. I know that 67 is not old, not the way I used to think of old, and that the women who will actually show up for you at 4 in the morning with a thermos of coffee at a departure gate with compression socks still on, those women are worth more than any account I could ever fund. The luggage is still in my front closet, the dusty green carry-on. I didn't put it away in the basement like I usually do with things I won't need for a while. I left it out because I plan on needing it again. The kettle is easy enough to reheat. I keep coming back to that notepad, my own handwriting, my granddaughter's name at the top with a little star beside it. Everyone I loved laid out in a list like a grocery run. There's something almost embarrassing about it now. Not because the love was wrong, but because I had made myself so entirely responsible for other people's happiness that I forgot to check whether anyone was responsible for mine. That's not a small thing to realize at 67. What I know about cause and effect, not fate, not punishment, just the plain mechanics of how actions move through a life, is that we teach people how to treat us over a long period of time, quietly and without meaning to. Every time I paid without mentioning the amount, every time I smoothed something over rather than naming it, every time I took the thumbs up emoji as a yes and kept planning, I was teaching my son that I would absorb whatever came. And he learned the lesson. He didn't learn it to be cruel. He just learned it because I taught it. That is the part that took me the longest to sit with. Not his behavior, mine. Sheila once said to me during one of our night shifts years ago that the most ethical thing a person can do is be honest about what they need. I thought that was a strange way to frame ethics at the time. I thought ethics had to do with honesty toward other people, not toward yourself. But she was right, and I understand it better now. Because when I paid $12,000 without saying a word and called it love, I wasn't being honest. I was being convenient. And convenience is not love. It just wears love's clothing. What I had to develop, later than I would have liked, was the intelligence to see the difference. Not book intelligence. I had plenty of that. 34 years of clinical thinking will do that to you. But the quieter kind, the kind that asks, what is actually happening here, underneath what I want to believe is happening? When my son said, it's nothing personal, what did he mean and what did he not mean? When I looked at that booking screen at 11 o'clock at night and saw my own name on every reservation, what did that tell me about what I was capable of doing next? I made a choice, not a dramatic one, not the kind that gets applause, a practical, deliberate, irreversible choice. I picked up the phone. I called Sheila. I called June. I changed the names on the cabins, and I paid the $240 rebooking fee, and I packed the dusty green carry-on I bought for a trip that was supposed to mean something else. And that, I think, is what strength actually looks like from the inside. Not loud, not righteous, just a woman who finally decided that if the booking was in her name, so was the rest of it. I came home from that cruise different in a way I'm still working out how to describe. Standing at the bow in Juneau in the rain, watching that whale surface and roll and disappear, something in me went quiet in the good way. The way a room goes quiet when all the right people are in it. Sheila beside me, my daughter on my other side, June saying, "Oh my God," in that voice of hers. That was the reward. Not for being good, not for being patient, not for earning anything, just for finally showing up for myself the way I had spent a lifetime showing up for everyone else. The luggage is still in the front closet. I meant what I said about needing it again.